Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Bible in 1 year with the Preacher's Husband. Today, we are talking about Deuteronomy chapter 17 through 20. And tomorrow, we're going to be on Deuteronomy chapter 21 through 23. And we start out chapter 17 talking about forbidden worship and also the judicial procedure for idolatry. Basically, that was the death penalty. It was essentially treason to worship another god. In the end of verse 7, it says, "You must purge the evil from you." I personally don't see that the evil was ever purged completely from Israel. Do you? I still see conflicts in Israel today. There's still the issue of they can't even have access to the temple because of the Palestinian and Israeli conflict and the different peace agreements that they keep trying to have that include these holy places for Israel. It goes on to talk about difficult cases. And in these difficult cases, these cases were decided by priests and judges. Now, the presence of the priest and the judge make clear that there was no separation between the secular and the spiritual or the sacred, and that every violation of the law was a violation of the covenant between the Lord and his people. In the theocracy of the Old Testament Israel, sin and crime were both one and the same thing. They were not differentiated. Doing a crime was a sin, and doing a sin was a crime. They were the same thing. Inasmuch as the judge and the priest were serving the Lord, their judgment was also final. This suggests that the verdicts, which were achieved by both wise assessment of the evidence and divine revelation, the person acting arrogantly against a judgment of the court was in fact acting arrogantly against the Lord and was therefore guilty of a capital offense, just like the high treason. And that would have been the death penalty as well. Now we get to chapter 17, verse 14. And verse 14 says this: "When you enter the land the Lord your God is giving you, take possession of it, live in it, and say, I will set a king over me, like all the nations around me." A king. Wow. For like 400 years or so, the Israelites lived under an Egyptian king. Though God himself at this point was their king, they would want a human king as a means of establishing peace and stability in a time when anarchy might otherwise prevail. The desire for a king would not in itself be wrong, because the Lord had promised Abraham and Sarah that they would produce a line of kings, didn't they? That was in Genesis chapter 17. It was in verse 6 and verse 16 in Genesis chapter 17, actually. And Jacob prophesied that a messianic king would spring from the tribe of Judah. That was in Genesis chapter 49, verse 10, if you remember. At stake here were guidelines by which such future rulers must govern themselves and their people. So there were even rules that the king had to go by. For instance, he had to place his confidence in God. He couldn't place his confidence in himself. He had to place his confidence in God. And he also couldn't place his confidence in a huge army and many horses and having a powerful military. That wouldn't do it either, because God was the one that went to war for the people, not the people for war for God. He wasn't allowed to practice polygamy either. In other words, he couldn't have a bunch of wives, because it said that basically if he married a bunch of wives, the odds are that one or two of them or more would be of different religions, and to be able to satisfy his wives, he would be tempted to do things that were from other religious traditions, which was against the law. You could not do that. He must also resist the urge to accumulate riches, because these would likely cause him to depend on his own resources again, rather than depending on the Lord. And that is the biggest problem with the rich. The rich become so self-sufficient that they forget to rely on God. They rely on themselves and their money and their power and their fame and fortune, as opposed to relying on God and what He is going to provide for you. So there's that fear. Chapter 18 gets into the provisions for the Levites, occult practices versus prophetic revelation. Now in verse 10 of chapter 18 it says basically that no one among you is to sacrifice his son, daughter in the fire, practice divination, tell fortunes, interpret omens, practice sorcery, cast spells, consult a medium or a spiritualist, or inquire of the dead. Anybody who does this is detestable. And we get to verse 21, it says, you may say to yourself, how can we recognize a message the Lord has not spoken? This is referring to prophets. Basically, he said that I'm going to send you a prophet after Moses that's going to speak the words of the Lord. And they're basically, well, how we know who that is? And he gives you the answer right here. When a prophet speaks in the Lord's name and the message does not come true or is not fulfilled, that is a message the Lord has not spoken. So he basically says, if he's real, what he says is going to be true. If he's not real, what he says is not going to come true. In chapter 19, we talk about cities of refuge and boundary markers. Good fences make good neighbors, so to speak. That's kind of where that is. And witnesses in court. Verse 21 of chapter 19 is, do not show pity, life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, and foot for foot. You ever heard that before? Eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth? There it is. Then we get into chapter 20, the rules for war. War, war, war. Rules for war. When you are about to engage, this is verse 2. When you are about to engage in battle, the priest is to come forward and address his army. He is to say to them, listen, Israel, today you are about to engage in battle with your enemies. Do not be cowardly. Do not be afraid, alarmed, or terrified because of them, for the Lord your God is the one who goes with you to fight for you against your enemies, to give you victory. That is super powerful. And when I read those exact words, I think of Franklin D. Roosevelt. And I think of Franklin D. Roosevelt specifically because of his State of the Union address that he gave in 1939. It basically underscores how, until recent years, America's leadership understood the vital connection between religion and democracy and world events. With Hitler being on the move in Europe, President Roosevelt said the following words. Storms from abroad directly challenge three institutions indispensable to Americans, now as always. The first is religion. It is the source of the other two, democracy and international good faith. Religion, by teaching man his relationship to God, gives the individual a sense of his own dignity and teaches him to respect himself by respecting his neighbors. Democracy, the practice of self-government, is a covenant among free men to respect the rights and liberties of their fellows. International good faith, a sister of democracy, springs from the will of civilized nations of men to respect the rights and liberties of other nations of men. In a modern civilization, all three, religion, democracy, and international good faith, complement and support each other. Where freedom of religion has been attacked, the attack has come from sources opposed to democracy. Where democracy has been overthrown, the spirit of free worship has disappeared. And where religion and democracy have vanished, good faith and reason in international affairs have given way to strident ambition and brute force. An ordering of society which relegates religion, democracy, and good faith among nations to the background can find no place within it for the ideals of the Prince of Peace, referring to Jesus. The United States rejects such an ordering and retains its ancient faith. There comes a time in the affairs of men when they must prepare to defend not their homes alone, but the tenets of faith and humanity on which their churches, their governments, and their very civilization are founded. The defense of religion, of democracy, and of good faith among nations is all the same fight. To save one, we must now make up our minds to save all. And this led into FDR repealing the Neutrality Act that had kept the United States out of the World War up until that point. God bless you. I hope this has touched you. If it has, please click that like button and of course that subscribe button and click the little jingle bell so you can get notified the next time that I upload a video. Put in the comments section if there's anything that I skipped over that you want to talk about, or if something really touched you in a way that you want to discuss it more in depth in the comments. I hope to see you tomorrow. Remember, chapter 21 through 23 of Deuteronomy, and we will see you again tomorrow for another episode of the Bible in 1 year with the Preacher's Husband. See you then.